My daughter and her husband pushed me off a cliff to get their hands on my $3 million inheritance. They thought I was dead. I survived, and I made their lives a living hell. Where are you watching us from today? Let us know your location in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button. Let me tell you how I ended up lying among the rocks at the bottom of a ravine, pretending to be dead while listening to my own daughter celebrate my murder. But before we get there, you need to understand how a 58-year-old woman like me, Rose Miller, ended up in such a ridiculous and terrifying situation. It all started 6 months earlier when my husband Edward died of a sudden massive heart attack. He was only 52, and according to him, in perfect health until he just collapsed in the yard one Saturday morning. By the time I came running from the kitchen, he was already gone. The funeral was, well, let's call it revealing. My daughter Valerie cried appropriately. Her husband, Jason Black, held her hand, with that studied gesture of a devoted husband that I always found a little too theatrical. But what really caught my attention was the conversation I overheard after the burial. I was in the funeral home restroom, one of those fancy ones with classical music playing softly in the background, when I heard their voices in the hallway. I'd recognize Valerie's voice anywhere, and Jason's with that accent I never quite took to. $3 million, Jason said. Your dad was richer than we thought. Mom is going to inherit everything, Valerie replied, and I swear there wasn't a speck of emotion in her voice, just calculation. The will is crystal clear. We'll just have to be patient. I froze in that bathroom, my hands still damp, my heart racing, not so much because of what they were saying, but how they were saying it, as if I were just a temporary obstacle between them and the money. I should have done something then. I should have confronted them or at least stayed on high alert. But the grief over losing Edward was so overwhelming that I chose to believe I had misinterpreted it. That my daughter, the girl I raised, the one I gave everything to, couldn't possibly be planning, well, what she eventually planned. The following months were strange. Valerie and Jason became extraordinarily attentive. Weekly dinners, daily calls, constant invitations. Mom, you shouldn't be alone, Valerie would say. Come live with us. But I refused. I had my home, my routines, my memories of Edward in every corner. My attorney had clearly explained the inheritance. $3 million in investments, plus the house, plus the life insurance, all of it mine. Edward had been meticulous with his finances, which I always appreciated, but I never paid much attention. He handled the money, I handled everything else. That's how our marriage worked. Mrs. Miller, Mr. Davis, a serious man in gold-rimmed glasses, had told me, your husband made everything very clear. You are the sole beneficiary. Upon your passing, everything will go to your daughter, Valerie. But as long as you live, it's all yours. As long as you live. Words that sounded like simple legal jargon then, but would later echo in my head with chilling clarity. It was April when things started getting truly bizarre. Valerie insisted we take a 3-generation healing trip. Her, me, and her 7-year-old daughter, Sophie. Jason suggested a beautiful spot on the coast, a cliff overlooking spectacular sunsets in Northern California. Mom, you need fresh air, Valerie insisted. You've been cooped up in that house for 6 months. It's not healthy. She was right about that. I had spent months within those walls, reliving every moment with Edward, crying at night, wondering what to do with the rest of my life. At 58, I felt old and tired. Though deep down I knew I had a lot of life left. I agreed to go. Big mistake. The trip started well. Sophie was excited. Valerie smiled more than usual. Even Jason seemed relaxed. We stayed in a small hotel near the cliffs, and the first day was normal. We walked, ate seafood. Sophie collected shells on the beach. But the second day, everything changed. Mom, Valerie said during breakfast, today we're going up to the cliff viewpoint. The views are incredible. You have to see it. Something in her tone made me nervous. I can't explain exactly why, just a knot in my stomach. But I ignored it. She was my daughter, for goodness sake, my own daughter. We hiked up around noon. The sun was hot and the sea wind was constant. The viewpoint was deserted, just the 4 of us, and the ocean roaring hundreds of feet below. The views were spectacular, but I couldn't focus on the beauty. That feeling of unease grew with every step. Sophie, honey, Go with your mom and look for more shells down that path, Jason suddenly said, pointing toward the trail that led down. Grandma and I will take pictures up here. Valerie hesitated for a moment, then nodded, took Sophie's hand, and walked away. I stood next to Jason, looking out at the ocean, trying to calm my irrational nerves. Mrs. Miller, Jason said, and his voice sounded different, colder. You know people fall from here every year. I turned to look at him, confused. Excuse me? Accidents, he continued, walking closer to the edge. People get distracted admiring the view, take a wrong step. And he gestured with his hands. That's when I saw it, in his eyes, a coldness that froze my blood. Jason, back away from the edge, I said, trying to sound calm as I slowly backed up. He smiled. You're the one who should come closer, Rose. The view's better from here. My heart started hammering. This couldn't be happening. This was absurd. I looked around for Valerie, but she and Sophie had completely disappeared from the trail. Valerie is waiting in the car for you, Jason said, as if reading my thoughts. With Sophie. There's no one else here, Rose, just you and me. What are you doing? My voice sounded shaky, and I hated that. I hated sounding weak, accelerating the inevitable. He moved fast, too fast for a woman my age who had never been particularly athletic. His hands grabbed me firmly, and suddenly I was being shoved toward the edge. The instinct to survive is a powerful thing. I fought. I scratched. I screamed. But Jason was stronger, younger, and determined. The last thing I remember before falling was his face, showing no trace of remorse, only a kind of professional concentration. And then, the void. The fall felt eternal and fleeting at the same time. The wind roaring in my ears. The ocean rushing up too fast. My life didn't flash before my eyes, but one clear, furious thought did. That bastard is killing me. I hit rocks, branches, vegetation. The pain was indescribable, each impact worse than the last. And then, finally, I stopped on a small rocky ledge, about 60 feet down, completely hidden from view above, by an overhang and thick thorny bushes. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I woke up, every inch of my body screamed in pain. My left arm was swollen and likely fractured. I had blood on my face from several cuts. And when I tried to sit up, a sharp pain in my ribs made me gasp. But I could move, I could think. And then I heard something that made me go completely still. Voices, above me, at the lookout. Are you sure she fell? It was Valerie, my daughter. Completely. There's no way she survived that drop. Jason sounded calm, even satisfied. What if someone finds her? It's a dangerous cliff, Val. Accidents like this happen all the time. Careless tourists, elderly people who shouldn't be walking near the edge alone. I saw her fall and immediately ran to get help. Valerie interrupted, a sharp tone in her voice. She wasn't alone. She was with you. I saw her fall and immediately ran to get help. Unfortunately, by the time authorities arrived, it was too late. A terrible tragedy. There was a long silence. Then Valerie's voice, softer now. The 3 million. It'll be ours in less than 6 months. The will is clear. I'm the sole heir. Lying there, bruised and bleeding, with every breath sending waves of pain through my body, I made a decision that would probably save my life. I stayed completely still. I didn't scream. I didn't call for help. I just closed my eyes and played dead. Because if Jason came down to check that I was dead and discovered I was still alive, well, I was in a perfect position for him to finish the job. I listened to them move around above, their footsteps gradually fading away. I waited until the silence was absolute, except for the constant roar of the ocean and the cry of the gulls. Only then did I open my eyes and assess my situation. I was alive, barely, but alive. My daughter and son-in-law had tried to murder me for $3 million, and they thought they had succeeded. Which I thought, as rage began to replace the shock, gave me a very interesting advantage. The first problem was obvious. I was trapped on a rocky ledge halfway down a cliff, with a possibly fractured arm and several bruised ribs. The second problem was that I didn't have my phone. My entire purse had been left up at the viewpoint, abandoned in my struggle with Jason. But the third problem, and perhaps the most important one, was that my daughter had just tried to kill me for money. And you know what? That problem gave me the energy to ignore the other two for a moment. Very carefully, acutely aware of every injured bone in my body, I evaluated my surroundings. The ledge where I had fallen was larger than I initially thought, maybe 10 feet wide. I was completely hidden from above by the protruding rock ledge and the thorny thicket that likely cushioned my fall. Pure luck. Or maybe the universe decided my story wasn't ending like that. With my right hand, which miraculously seemed functional, I tore strips from my shirt for makeshift bandages. The biggest cut was on my forehead, a deep scrape on my thigh. It wasn't perfect, but it would stop the worst of the bleeding. Over my head, I began to hear more distant sounds. Helicopters in the distance. The search had begun. But thanks to the angle of the overhang and the dense vegetation, from above this section of the cliff looked like an uninterrupted vertical wall. I was hidden in plain sight. I looked down, another 50 feet of descent, but not vertical, more of a steep slope with vegetation and rocks. Painful, but possible. I started moving. Every inch was agony. I used my right hand and both legs, keeping my left arm pressed against my body. The slope was slippery, but there were roots, rocks, enough grips. It took me 2 hours. 2 hours of focused pain, near slips, moments where I thought I couldn't go on. But finally, as the sun began to dip, my feet touched solid sand in a small hidden cove. I collapsed onto the sand, shaking with pain and exhaustion. I had made it, I had survived. But now came the tricky part. I followed the coastline in the growing darkness, each step sending jolts of pain through my ribs. After what felt like an eternity, I saw lights, a small seafood restaurant at the end of a pier. The man who opened the back door after I knocked was about 60, apron-stained, and his face was alarmed when he saw me. "Ma'am, are you okay? What happened to you?" "I had an accident," I managed to say. "Please, I need to use your phone." He let me in, offering me water as he reached for the emergency line. I raised my good hand, stopping him. "No, please, there's something. I need to call someone first." With trembling fingers, I dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Richard Stone, Edward's friend from college, a brilliant attorney, and the only person I could completely trust. "Hello?" His voice sounded groggy. "Richard, it's Rose Miller." "Rose, are you all right? It's 10 at night and—" "They tried to kill me," I said directly. "Jason and Valerie pushed me off a cliff. They think I'm dead, and I need you to help me." A long silence. "Where are you?" I gave him the location. "Richard, I need your legal advice. If I show up now, it'll be my word against theirs. I need solid evidence before involving the authorities." "Rose, legally you should report this immediately, but I understand your reasoning. Give me 48 hours to gather ironclad evidence before making a formal complaint. Deal?" "Deal." "I'll be there in 2 hours. I know a discreet doctor who can examine you without asking questions. Then we plan our next step." After hanging up, the restaurant owner, Tom, offered me a blanket. "You want me to call the police?" he asked. "Help is coming," I assured him. "But Tom, I need to ask you something. No one can know I was here. It's complicated." He studied me, then nodded. "I never saw you." When Richard finally arrived, his face was a mask of shock. "My God, Rose, you look worse than it is." I lied. He drove me to his home, where the doctor he called examined me meticulously. "Minor fracture in the left forearm," he announced. "Severe contusion to the ribs, but not broken. Thank God. Multiple superficial lacerations. You are very lucky to be alive, ma'am." He cast my arm, gave me strong painkillers, and ordered rest. Once alone with Richard, I told him everything, every detail. "Rose," he said carefully, "we need to report this now. We have 48 hours before I become an accessory to obstruction. I know, but first, I need you to investigate their finances. I need to understand why $3 million was worth committing murder." For the next 2 days, Richard worked nonstop. What he discovered was revealing. Jason and Valerie were buried in debt. Unpaid student loans, 3 maxed-out credit cards, a personal loan of $200,000 in default with their house as collateral. They had tried to use my house as collateral 6 months ago, forging my signature. And most importantly, Jason had gambling debts to some very dangerous people. "They are going to lose their house in less than 3 months," Richard explained. "And these people Jason owes money to are not the kind who accept payment plans." It all clicked. It wasn't just greed. It was absolute desperation. "Now we hire a private investigator," I said, "and after that we go to the authorities." Are you sure? Completely. But first, I want them to feel like they won, and then we take everything away. The private investigator Richard hired was professional and discreet. In 3 days, he had pure gold. Audio recordings of Jason and Valerie in their hotel room. He had gained access posing as cleaning staff, discussing exactly how they would spend the $3 million. First, we pay off the gambling debts. Jason's voice was heard on the recording. Then the house, and then that European cruise you always wanted. How long do we have to wait before we start spending? Valerie asked. I don't want it to look suspicious. 6 months, a year to be completely safe. Can we live with that? The arrogance in their voices was astonishing. They truly thought they had pulled it off. With this and the bank records, Richard said, we have a solid case. Not yet, I insisted. First, I want them to feel like they won, and then we pull the rug out from under them. I spent the next few days at Richard's house, healing while I planned. My first move was through Mr. Davis, Edward's attorney. I need you to implement the protective trust Edward set up, I instructed him over the phone. The one that activates in case of suspicious death. Davis asked no questions. He simply executed it. The trust was a masterpiece of legal planning by Edward. In the event of my death, under suspicious circumstances, the entire estate would be frozen for a minimum of 1 year while an investigation took place, and the house would be donated to charity before Valerie could touch it. 3 days after my death, Davis contacted them with the bad news. According to Richard, Valerie nearly fainted. Then came the bills. I had been paying several automatic insurance and utility accounts that Jason and Valerie assumed would continue. When those payments stopped, they suddenly faced eviction notices and service cutoffs. And my masterstroke. I anonymously contacted Jason's gambling creditors. I informed them that their debtor had been counting on an inheritance that was now indefinitely frozen. 3 days later, Jason was hospitalized with broken ribs and a black eye. Rose, Richard said cautiously, this is going too far. Too far? They tried to kill me. I know, but we need to make the formal complaint now. The 48 hours are up. We have the evidence we needed. He was right. It was time. Okay, I agreed. But when we confront them, I want to be there. I want to see their faces when they realize their plan fell. Richard arranged a meeting at Mr. Davis's office under the pretext of discussing complicated inheritance procedures. I arrived first, waiting. My arm was still in a cast, my bruises still visible. Perfect physical evidence. When the door opened and Valerie saw me, the color completely drained from her face. Jason froze, his mouth opening soundlessly. Hello, sweetheart, I said calmly. I heard you were looking for me. If I could freeze a moment in time, it would be the expression on Valerie's face at that precise second. Absolute terror mixed with confusion, as if her brain couldn't process what it was seeing. Jason found his voice first. Mrs. Miller, you fell. I fell, yes, I confirmed calmly. It was very thoughtful of you to push me, Jason, though I must say your technique needs work. The silence was absolute. Valerie sank into a chair, still staring at me as if I were a ghost. I don't know what you're talking about, Jason stammered, but his face said otherwise. You don't? I pulled out my phone. Richard had retrieved it from my purse, which the police had confiscated as evidence of the accident before we knew I had survived. As Edward's executor and my legal representative, Richard had the right to access my personal belongings. I pressed play. The voices filled the room. The private investigator's recording. 3 million, Val. We're finally going to climb out of this hole. Are you sure there's no way she survived? Impossible. That fall, no one survives that. I stopped the recording. Valerie had started crying. Tears of pure panic. Mom, she started, her voice cracking. We didn't. You knew? I interrupted her. When you left me alone with Jason on that cliff, when you took Sophie away, did you know exactly what he was going to do? Her silence was answer enough. This is a misunderstanding, Jason tried. Rose, you're confused. I have your conversation recorded planning to spend my money. I have records of your debts. I have evidence you tried to forge my signature. And I have my own testimony of how you deliberately shoved me off that cliff. Richard, who had been standing in the corner, finally spoke. We also have statements from hotel staff about your strange behavior the day of the incident, and medical reports confirming that Mrs. Miller's injuries are consistent with being pushed, not an accidental fall. What do you want? Valerie asked. Her voice was barely a whisper. Money. I laughed without humor. Money? Valerie, you don't have money. That was the whole point? We didn't mean to hurt you, she cried. We were just desperate enough to push me off a cliff. Mr. Davis, please explain the situation to them. Davis cleared his throat. Ms. Miller and Mr. Black, due to a documented attempt of homicide against the principal beneficiary, your inheritance has been completely revoked. Mr. Miller had included this specific clause in his will. What? Jason stood up violently. You can't. Oh, yes, we can, Davis said calmly. Valerie was in complete shock. But we're family. You stopped being my family when you decided my life was worth less than $3 million. I stood up with difficulty. And now you are going to face the consequences. Are you going to call the police? He walked toward the door, which then opened, and 2 officers walked in. In fact, they are already here. The next hour was a blur. Miranda writes, Jason screams, Valerie's pleas. Handcuffs clicked on their wrists. Just before she was led away, Valerie looked at me. Did you ever love me? Every day of your life, I replied, until the moment you decided I was worth more dead than alive. After they left, I sat down heavily. Richard put a hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing. Did I? Because it feels like I just lost my daughter. You lost your daughter the moment she chose money over you. This is just acknowledging that loss. As we left the office, I could only think one thing. I had survived against all odds, and now I had to figure out how to live with it. The next few months were a legal whirlwind. Jason and Valerie were formally charged with premeditated attempted murder. With the recordings, my testimony, forensic evidence, and financial records showing clear motive, the case was rock solid. Their lawyer tried everything. He argued temporary insanity, extreme financial pressure, even suggested I had provoked the incident. Nothing worked. The judge set bail so high it was impossible to pay. While awaiting trial, they would remain in custody. And Sophie, my little 7-year-old Sophie, was placed in the custody of social services. That was the most devastating part. My granddaughter, innocent in all of this, paying the price for her parents' decisions. I applied for custody immediately. The process was exhausting. Social services needed to ensure I was physically and mentally stable to care for a child. Psychological evaluations, physical exams, home visits. My entire life was scrutinized. Mrs. Miller, Patricia, the assigned social worker, told me, this is a very unusual situation. I understand perfectly. Sophie is traumatized. She doesn't understand why her parents can't see her. Let me see her, I pleaded. I'm her grandmother, the only family she has left. After 3 weeks that felt eternal, I was allowed a supervised visit. Sophie was thinner, paler. When I entered the visitation room, she was sitting in a corner drawing. Sophie? She looked up. Her eyes, the same color as Valerie's, looked at me with confusion and hope. Grandma? Hello, my love. She ran toward me, hitting me so hard that my ribs protested. I didn't care. I wrapped her in my arms as she cried. They told me you fell, she sobbed. They said you were dead, but then you weren't dead. But Mom and Dad can't come back, and no one will tell me why. I know, baby. It's very confusing. I held her closer. But I'm here now. I'm going to take care of you. When can Mom and Dad come back? The question I had dreaded. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that her parents tried to murder her grandmother? Your parents made a very big mistake, I said carefully. And when adults make very big mistakes, they have to go away for a while. Was it a mistake with you? Yes, it was a mistake with me. But Sophie, none of this is your fault. None of it. You are perfect, and this has nothing to do with you. She looked at me with those 2 wise eyes. Are you going to leave me too? My heart broke. Never, I promise. 2 months later, I gained temporary custody. Sophie moved in with me, and slowly we started to build a new normal. It wasn't easy. She had nightmares almost every night. She cried for her parents. And when I finally gently explained what they had done, she had a complete breakdown. It's not true. You're lying. I didn't blame her. She went to child therapy 3 times a week, and I went to therapy too. How do you feel about Valerie now? My therapist asked. And about Sophie? Sophie's innocent. She didn't ask for any of this. But it must be hard to see her. She looks like her mother. I close my eyes every day and I wonder where I went wrong. Rose, you didn't raise a murderer. You raised a child who grew up and made her own choices. Maybe. But the guilt persisted. The trial was set for 6 months after the arrest. The media went wild. Daughter tries to murder mother for $1 million inheritance. The headlines were sensational. Sophie was bullied at school until I moved her to a private one where no one knew our story. On the day of the trial, I dressed carefully. Sophie stayed with Richard. I couldn't allow her to hear the details. The courtroom was full. Valerie and Jason sat together, their lawyer whispering to them. When I entered, Valerie looked at me with a complex expression of shame and regret. My testimony took 3 hours. I described every detail: the cliff, the fall, the recovery, the recordings. Mrs. Miller, the defense attorney said, you had disagreements about money. Earlier in January, you had differences about responsible finances, and you refused to help her when she asked for assistance. I refused to pay gambling debts and allow them to use my property as collateral. I offered other types of assistance that were rejected. Could your refusal have pushed her into a desperate mental state? I leaned forward. I refused to allow financial manipulation. What they did was their decision, a decision for which they must answer. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned, guilty. The courtroom erupted. Valerie started to cry. Jason remained motionless. The sentencing came a week later. 15 years for Jason, 12 for Valerie, with the possibility of parole after 8. In consideration of the apparently lesser role of the defendant Black, the judge explained, this court shows some clemency. However, attempting to take a life, especially a family member's, warrants significant punishment. I watched my daughter being led away in handcuffs, and I felt everything and nothing all at once. Afterward, Richard guided me through the reporters. It's over, he said. No, I whispered. There's still Sophie. That night, I explained to Sophie that her parents wouldn't be coming home for a very long time. She cried for hours. Eventually, exhausted, she fell asleep in my arms. I carried her to her bed. I tucked her in. As I watched her sleep, I swore I would do everything I could to give her a better life. Because in the end, Sophie was the real victim. And she deserved better. We all deserved it. 3 years passed. 3 years since the cliff. Sophie was now 10. She still went to therapy, but the nightmares had lessened. She was thriving in her new school, had friends, and had joined the soccer team. I had sold a big house and bought something smaller, more manageable. A fresh start for both of us. The $3 million was still there, untouched except for the new house and Sophie's expenses. Edward's pension was enough to live comfortably. Valerie had written letters from prison, many letters. At first, I burned them unread, but after a year, curiosity won. Mom, one began, I know there are no words that can excuse what I did, but I need you to know that every day I live with the weight of what I did to you. Prison therapy has helped me see things about myself that I never wanted to admit. My greed, my selfishness. I don't expect your forgiveness. I only hope that someday Sophie can understand that her parents made a terrible mistake, but that we love her. The letter continued. Pages of apologies that changed nothing, but something in the words made me think that maybe there was genuine remorse. I didn't reply, but I saved the letter. Sophie occasionally asked about her parents. Over time, the questions became less frequent. One day she asked me, Grandma, are you ever going to forgive Mom? We were baking cookies in the kitchen. I don't know, honey. Forgiveness is complicated. My therapist says that forgiving doesn't mean what happened was okay. It means letting it go so it doesn't hurt you anymore. I looked at my granddaughter, so wise. Your therapist is very smart. Does it still hurt you? Every day, but less than before. I'm mad at them too, but I miss them. Is that okay? Of course it's okay. You can be angry at someone and miss them at the same time. Do you think we can ever be family again? I didn't have an answer for that. The 8th year after the incident brought news that I had been both waiting for and dreading. Valerie would be eligible for a parole hearing in 3 months. The notification arrived by certified mail. Sophie, now 15, noticed my expression. "What is it?" I showed her the letter. She read it in silence. "Do you want her to get out?" she asked. "I don't know. Part of me wants her to pay forever, but another part thinks of you. Dr. Chen says I can want her to come out and be afraid at the same time." "Your Dr. Chen is wise. Are you going to speak at her hearing?" "I've been asked to." "What are you going to say?" "I don't know yet." The next few weeks, I visited Valerie 3 more times, evaluating whether the change she claimed was genuine. On one visit, I finally asked the question I had avoided. "Why did you think you could do it? Why did you think you were capable of pushing your own mother off a cliff?" Valerie took a long time to answer. "Because I didn't think of you as my mother at that moment," she said. "I had turned you into just an obstacle. Dehumanization, my therapist calls it. It's easier to hurt someone when you stop seeing them as a person. And now I see you, and the guilt is unbearable." "Good, it should be," she nodded. "Does Sophie talk about me?" "Sometimes. She's angry, but she misses you too." "Would she want to see me? If I get out?" "Maybe, with supervision. And only if her therapist thinks she's ready." Hope shone in her eyes. "That's more than I deserve." "Much more." The parole hearing was on a Tuesday morning. Richard accompanied me. The board consisted of 5 serious people who reviewed the file. The head of rehabilitation spoke first, praising Valerie's progress. Then the prosecutor described the crime in graphic detail. Finally, I was called. "Mrs. Miller," the chairman began, "do you believe your daughter still poses a danger?" I took a deep breath. "The Valerie who pushed me was a danger," I began. "She was someone consumed by desperation and greed who lost all moral perspective." I watched the hope in Valerie's eyes begin to fade. But I continued, "I have visited my daughter regularly for 2 years. I have seen the evidence of her work, and I believe that dangerous Valerie no longer exists." Valerie audibly sobbed. "However," I added, "believing someone has changed and trusting them completely are two different things. If she is released, it should be with conditions, many conditions." "What conditions?" "Mandatory continuous therapy, financial counseling, check-ins with a parole officer, and contact with my granddaughter only under professional supervision." "And you, Mrs. Miller?" I looked at Valerie. "That would depend on her actions, not words. She has to prove every single day that she understands the magnitude of her betrayal." The board deliberated for 2 hours. "The board recognizes the exceptional progress," the chairwoman announced. "However, the severity of the crime cannot be overlooked. Therefore, we grant parole under the following conditions: residence in a halfway house for 6 months, weekly therapy, financial counseling, stable employment, and all contact with Rose Miller and Sophie Black must be approved by the parole officer." Valerie collapsed in tears. 3 months later, Valerie was released. Richard was there to meet her. The first time I saw her outside of prison was a month later. We met at a park, with her officer present. She arrived early, nervous, wearing ill-fitting clothes. We sat on a bench, keeping our distance. "Thank you for speaking up for me," she said. "I didn't do it for you. I did it for Sophie, because I believe in second chances. But Valerie, this is your only chance. I won't disappoint you. I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving that I've changed." "Good, because that's what it's going to take." We sat in silence, watching the birds. It was strange and uncomfortable, but maybe it was a start. "When can I see Sophie?" "When her therapist says she's ready." Valerie nodded. "Is she okay?" "She's thriving. She's strong, smart, resilient. I just want the chance to know the person she's become." It was the most I could hope for. The following months, Valerie worked hard. She got a job at a bookstore. She attended therapy. She met every condition. And slowly, very slowly, we started to rebuild something. Not what we had before. That was broken. But something new, honest and raw. Sophie agreed to meet with Valerie 4 months later. I was present, as was Dr. Chen. It was awkward and emotional, with tears from both sides. "I don't forgive you," Sophie told her directly. "Maybe someday, but not today." "That's fair," Valerie replied. "It's more than I deserve." As I watched my daughter and granddaughter tries to navigate this complicated territory, I realized something. Survival wasn't just about being alive. It was about choosing to live despite the pain. And maybe it was also about giving people the opportunity to prove they could change. Only time would tell if Valerie truly had. But for the first time in years, I had a small spark of hope. 2 years after her release, Valerie had built an unrecognizable life. She lived in a small apartment, she worked as a manager at the bookstore, she attended therapy religiously. She had paid back every possible cent of her old debts, and most importantly, she had slowly built a cautious relationship with Sophie. Now 17, it wasn't perfect. Sophie kept high guards up, and Valerie constantly stumbled, but they were trying. As for me and Valerie, it was complicated. It always would be. We had progressed from supervised meetings to occasional coffee, from tense conversations to dialogues that sometimes almost felt normal. But there was always a shadow between us. Jason was another story. His parole hearing had been denied. Violence in prison, lack of remorse, continued involvement in illegal gambling. He would serve his full sentence. It was in March, 10 years after the cliff, when everything changed again. I was home with Sophie, helping her with algebra. When the doorbell rang, I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole. 2 detectives. I opened the door. "Can I help you?" the taller detective asked. "Mrs. Rose Miller?" "Yes, I am. I'm Detective Ramirez. This is Detective Torres." "Can we come in? We have questions about Jason Black." Something in my stomach twisted. I let them in, telling Sophie to go to her room. "Mrs. Miller," Ramirez began, "have you had any contact with Jason Black?" "No, none." "And your daughter Valerie?" "Valerie is not allowed to contact him under her parole conditions." "Why?" Torres leaned it in. "Jason Black was found dead in his cell 3 days ago. It initially appeared to be suicide, but the autopsy revealed inconsistencies. We believe it may have been murder. Some evidence suggests it might have been orchestrated from the outside," Ramirez added. I stared at them. "Are you accusing me?" "We're not accusing you, but we need to establish where you were 3 days ago and if you know anyone who might have wanted to hurt him." That was a long list. The guy owed money to half the city. I gave them my alibi. I was at a school meeting with Sophie. With 50 witnesses, I answered their questions. When they left, I sat down heavily. Sophie came downstairs. "Grandma, what happened?" "Your father is dead." I expected some big reaction. Instead, Sophie simply nodded and sat next to me. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Honestly, I don't feel anything. Jason has been dead to me since the cliff." "Do you think Mom had anything to do with it?" The question surprised me. "Why would you think that?" "I don't know. She hated Dad in the end." "What if—" "No. Your mother is working hard to rebuild her life. She wouldn't risk that for revenge." But even saying the words, a seed of doubt was planted. I called Valerie immediately. "Mom?" "Hello, I was thinking—" "Valerie, I need you to come over now. It's about Jason." Long silence. "What about Jason?" "He's dead." Another silence. "I'm on my way." She arrived in 20 minutes, pale but not sad. I told her everything. "I can't say I regret it," she said. "Jason ruined my life. He ruined Sophie's. He almost killed you." "Valerie," I interrupted, "did you have anything to do with this?" She looked at me directly. "No, I swear on Sophie." And I believed her. Because since she got out of prison, Valerie hadn't lied. Not once. The investigation continued for weeks. It turned out Jason had been running a gambling scheme in prison. He owed money to other inmates. There was no external connection. Just karma. The funeral was small. Just me, Valerie, Sophie, and Jason's mother, who blamed all of us. "You ruined my son," she screamed. "Witches!" Valerie simply took the abuse without responding. When the woman left, she looked at me. "She'll never understand that her good son almost killed you, that he manipulated me into believing that murder was the only option." No, she'll never understand. Parents rarely see their children clearly. "Did you see me clearly?" Before all this, it was a hard question. I think I saw what I wanted to see. I missed the signs because I didn't want to see trouble. "That wasn't your fault." "No, but it wasn't entirely yours either. Jason pushed you, manipulated you, convinced you. That doesn't excuse what you did, but it doesn't make it simple either. It was the first time I had acknowledged out loud that Jason had played a larger role. It was easier to blame only Valerie. But the truth was more complicated. In the car back, Sophie spoke. Is it bad that I'm not sad? No, my love, you don't have to be sad for someone who hurt you. The counselor says I should feel closure, but I don't feel any different. Closure is overrated, Valerie murmured. Sometimes things just end. It was perhaps the wisest thing I had ever heard Valerie say. That night, Valerie and I shared tea in the kitchen, something we had started doing occasionally. There's something I've never told you, Valerie began, about the cliff. My body tensed. Just before Jason pushed you, he hesitated for a second, and her voice broke. I pushed him to go on, literally. I pushed him and said, do it now. Absolute silence, this was new. So you see, I didn't just stand by. I was an active participant, and that's been eating me alive. Why are you telling me this now? Because Jason is dead and can't defend himself. And because you deserve the whole truth. Mom, I was as guilty as he was. Maybe more. I didn't let her finish. I stood up, walked over to her, and for the first time in 10 years, I actually hugged her. She collapsed against me, sobbing. I forgive you, I whispered, and as I said it, I realized it was true. Not an easy truth, but the truth. I won't forget, never, but I forgive you. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Probably not, but you have it. Because carrying this hate is killing me too, and because you've worked so hard to change. We stayed like that for a long time. When she pulled away, Valerie wiped her eyes. There's something else. The $3 million we were so desperate to get, Jason had gambled it away before he inherited it. He had taken out loans anticipating your death. If you really had died and I had inherited, it would have gone straight to paying off his debts. We wouldn't have seen a cent. I sat down heavily. What? I found out in prison. The whole plan, the entire murder was for nothing. Even if it had worked, I would have ended up with nothing but the guilt. The absurdity hit me then. They tried to murder me for money that wasn't even there anymore. And then, to my own surprise, I started to laugh. Not happy, hysterical, on the verge of tears. All of this for nothing, absolutely nothing. Valerie looked at me as if I had lost my mind. Sometimes life is absurd, I managed to say. Sometimes the pain makes no sense, and all you can do is laugh. And maybe, just maybe, find a way to move forward. 10 years after the cliff, my life looked remarkably different. Sophie had turned 17 and was applying to colleges. Brilliant, resilient, surprisingly well-adjusted. Her relationship with Valerie would never be perfect, but it had evolved into something functional. Valerie had become someone I barely recognized. She had been promoted, was finishing a degree in social work, and volunteered in prison rehabilitation programs. As for me, I decided that almost dying at 58 gave me some perspective. I used part of the $3 million to establish a foundation, not generic charity, but specifically for families caught in gambling debt. Financial counseling, legal support, recovery programs, everything Jason and Valerie needed but were too proud to seek. I called it the Second Chance Foundation. Richard became the legal director, working for a fraction of his usual fee. Edward would have been proud, he told me. There was another development. I had met someone, Michael, a 65-year-old widower, who volunteered at the same community center. He was gentle, patient, and when I told him my complete story, he simply said, "We all have scars. Yours are just more dramatic." It wasn't storybook romance. We were too old, carried too much baggage, but it was companionship, laughter, someone who reminded me there was life beyond the trauma. The 10-year anniversary ceremony came in April. I had organized a small gathering at the very cliff where I almost died. It sounded morbid, maybe it was, but I needed to do this. Sophie, Valerie, Richard, Michael, and a few families the foundation had helped all gathered at the viewpoint. They had installed a plaque after my near-death warning people to stay behind the railings. I stood near the edge, not too close, with everyone forming a semicircle. 10 years ago, I began, my voice carrying on the wind. I fell from this cliff. I was pushed. And as I fell, I thought my life was over. I looked at Valerie, tears streaming down her face. But I didn't die. I survived, and in surviving, I learned something. The end of something doesn't have to be the end of everything. Sometimes it's just the beginning of something different. I pulled out a small journal, the one I had kept for 10 years, filled with thoughts, fears, hopes, and the gradual process of healing. This journal contains all my rage, all my pain, all my struggle to forgive the unforgivable, and today I let it go. I threw the journal over the edge. We watched it fall, spinning in the wind until it hit the rocks below. I don't forget, I never will, but I don't need to carry the weight anymore. I have built something good out of something terrible. I have found family in unexpected places, and I have discovered that I am stronger than I ever knew. Sophie stepped forward, taking my hand. Grandma, can I say something? Of course. When I was little, I thought family meant people who always loved you. And then I learned that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you hurt you the worst. It was devastating. She looked at Valerie. But in these 10 years, I've learned something different. Family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about the people who show up, who do the hard work, who earn your trust every day. Grandma, you did that. Michael, you did it. Richard, you did it. She turned to face Valerie. And Mom, I know you've been trying. I can see it. I'm not ready to say we're completely there. Maybe we never will be. But we're somewhere, and that's something. Valerie sobbed, covering her mouth. Sophie hesitated. Then she took a step and hugged her. It wasn't long, but it was real. After everyone had spoken, I stood alone at the viewpoint for a minute. I looked over the edge, down at the rocks. Thank you, I whispered. I wasn't sure to whom. The universe? God? Pure luck? Thank you for letting me live, for giving me the chance to turn this into more than a tragedy. The wind carried my words, mixing them with the cry of the gulls. That evening, I received a certified envelope. Inside was a letter from the parole board. Valerie's period of parole was officially over. She had met all her conditions. She was now officially free. I forwarded the letter to her. She called me an hour later, crying so hard she could barely speak. Mom, I can't believe... Valerie, I interrupted gently. You worked for this. Every day for 10 years, you chose to be better. Can we have dinner, you, me, and Sophie, as family? I considered that. 10 years ago, the answer would have been no. 5 years ago, maybe. But now, yes, we can have dinner. As family. It wasn't the family I had before. It wasn't the one I imagined. But it was our family, built from ruins, forged in trauma, held together by conscious daily effort instead of just blood. And maybe that made it stronger. A month later, while organizing papers for the foundation, I found something. The letter Edward had written to be open after his death. I had read it once after the funeral. Then I had packed it away. I read it again now, with a decade of perspective. My dearest Rose, he had written, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And it probably also means that Valerie is giving you trouble about the money. I'm sorry, my love. I failed to raise her better. I saw the signs of greed, of entitlement, but I always thought she'd mature. But whatever trouble she's causing, I want you to know this. You are stronger than you think, smarter than you give yourself credit for, and you deserve to live the rest of your life for yourself. That money is yours. Use it however you want. Travel. Pursue passions you put on hold. Live, Rose. Really live. Because you deserve every moment of happiness. Tears rolled down my face as I folded the letter. Oh, Edward, I whispered, I lived. In the most terrible, dramatic, near-fatal way possible. But I lived. Now, 10 years after almost dying, I sit on my balcony watching the sunset. Sophie is inside on the phone with her boyfriend. Valerie is coming over for our weekly dinner. Michael will be arriving soon. My body still carries the scars. My arm hurts when it's about to rain. I have a long mark along my side. And sometimes in nightmares, I'm still falling. But more often, I'm flying. Because that's what I've discovered. The difference between falling and flying is all about what you do after your feet leave the ground. They push me wanting to see me shattered. Instead, I learned to fly. And that's the best revenge of all.